The afternoon sun poured through the open windows, lighting up the small living room where Amina sat at the center of a table covered with bright balloons, plates of food, and a big chocolate. She had turned 12 that day, and her heart felt like it could burst from happiness. Laughter echoed around her as cousins played, a radio hummed with music, and the warm smell of fresh chapati drifted in from the kitchen. Relatives clapped and teased her, telling her to make a wish before blowing out the candles. But in the middle of all the joy, Grace, her stepmother, sat with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She clapped along, but her gaze on Amina felt sharp, almost cold. Amina didn't notice. She leaned forward toward the cake, cheeks puffed with excitement, ready to blow out the flickering flames. Just then, Grace stood up. The sound of her chair scraping the floor made a few people turn. In her hand, she held a pair of shiny silver scissors. At first, no one understood why. Before anyone could speak, Grace stepped close behind Amina, grabbed one of her long, neat braids, and, snip, the braid dropped onto the table like a dead snake. The room froze. Conversation stopped mid-word, forks hung in midair. A second braid fell to the floor. Amina sat stiff, her breath caught in her throat, eyes wide. Grace's smile grew. The music kept playing faintly, but the party was over. Only the sound of the scissors echoed in everyone's ears. Amina was only 8 when her world changed forever. One day she had a warm, gentle mother who brushed her hair every morning and told her stories before bed. And the next she was standing at a graveside, holding her father's hand, trying to understand why her mother wasn't coming back. The days after the funeral felt heavy and strained. The house, once filled with laughter and the smell of her mother's cooking, seemed too quiet. She found comfort in playing with her friend's hair, braiding and twisting it into styles she had seen her mother wear. Sometimes she would sit in front of a broken mirror and experiment on herself, using old ribbons and beads she found around the house. In her young heart, a dream began to grow. One day, she would become a hairdresser, someone who made people feel beautiful and confident, just like her mother used to make her feel. When Amina was 10, her father remarried. Grace arrived with polished nails, neatly tied headscarves, and a voice that sounded sweet when visitors were. At first, Amina hoped this meant her family would feel whole again. But it didn't take long for her to realize Grace's kindness was for show. Behind closed doors, Grace treated her like an extra chore rather than a stepdaughter. Grace's own daughter, Lydia, was only a year younger than Amina, but the two were never treated the same. Every morning, Amina woke before sunrise to help Lydia get ready for school. She would iron her uniforms, polish her shoes until they shone, and spend long minutes brushing and styling her hair into perfect braids. Grace would watch closely, correcting her if the style wasn't good enough, then praise Lydia for looking smart and neat. By the time Amina was done with Lydia's hair, there was barely a moment left for herself. She often went to school with her own hair uncombed, wearing clothes that were too small or faded from too many washes. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a girl who seemed invisible. Yet deep down, the dream never faded. Every time she braided Lydia's hair, she imagined running her own salon, with shelves of colorful beads, hair oils that smelled like flowers, and a big mirror where girls could see themselves shine. She didn't know how or when it would happen, but she promised herself she would find a way. Still, life under Grace's roof made it hard to believe in promises. The woman's voice was sharp when they were alone, always reminding Amina that she wasn't really her child. And Amina learned to hide her feelings, swallowing her hurt and smiling when visitors came, just like Grace did. It was easier than letting anyone know how lonely she felt. But in the quiet of her heart, she held onto her dream like a secret treasure, knowing it was the one thing Grace couldn't take away. Over the years, Amina had grown into a gentle, graceful girl. She had her mother's bright eyes, her warm smile, and a kindness that made people feel at ease. Neighbors often stopped her on the road to greet her, sometimes handing her a mango or telling her how polite she was. Children liked playing with her, and elders loved how she listened with respect. Even when she wore old clothes, she had a way of carrying herself that made her stand out. Grace noticed it, and each time she heard someone praise Amina, something twisted inside her. She tried to hide it, but jealousy sat in her heart like a thorn. It didn't matter that Amina was just a child. Grace couldn't stand seeing her get the attention. She wanted her own daughter, Lydia, to be the one everyone admired. As Amina's 12th birthday approached, the excitement in the house began to build. Relatives were traveling from other towns. Neighbors promised to stop by, and even her father seemed cheerful. Grace helped with the preparations, cooking, decorating, setting up chairs, but her smiles were stiff. She told herself she was doing it for her husband's sake, not for the girl she couldn't bring herself to love. On the morning of the party, the house buzzed with activity. Women chopped vegetables in the kitchen, children played outside, and the smell of frying meat drifted through the air. Amina moved from room to room, helping wherever she could, her laughter light and unforced. Grace stood in the corner, pretending to arrange plates, but really listening to the guests who had already arrived. That's when she heard it. Two women near the doorway were talking in low voices, but the words carried. "She looks so much like her late mother," one said softly. "Especially the eyes. Such a beautiful girl." "Yes," the other replied. "And so kind. You can tell her mother raised her well." The words hit Grace like hot coals. Her jaw tightened and her chest burned. Beautiful like her mother. Raised well by her mother. It was as if the woman she replaced was still here, still shining through Amina, still stealing the admiration she thought should belong to her and her daughter. As the day went on, Grace smiled for the guests, but in her mind, a plan was forming. She thought of how proud Amina looked with her long, neat braids, how people often said her hair was her crown. Grace decided she would take that crown away, and she wouldn't do it in private, where no one could see. No, she would do it in front of everyone, so the image of Amina's shame would be something people remembered. By the time the guests were seated and the music began, Grace's mind was made up. She had her weapon ready, hidden among the kitchen things, a pair of sharp scissors. While everyone else prepared to celebrate, she was preparing to strike. The party was in full swing. Music played from the old radio in the corner, children's laughter floated in from outside, and plates clinked as guests enjoyed the food. Amina sat at the center table, her chocolate cake in front of her, candles flickering brightly. Her cheeks ached from smiling, but she didn't mind. This was her day. She could see her friends and relatives watching her with warmth in their eyes. She closed her eyes for a second, ready to make her wish. Then she leaned forward, ready to blow out the candles. That was when she heard the scrape of a chair behind her. Grace was standing. No one thought much of it. Maybe she was going to say something. But in her hand, she held a pair of shiny silver scissors. Before Amina could even process what was happening, Grace stepped forward, her shadow falling over her. She grabbed one of Amina's long, neat braids in a firm fist. The braid had taken her hours to prepare that morning. She had been so proud of how smooth and beautiful it looked. Snip! The sound was small, but it was like the whole world heard it. The braid dropped onto the table, landing right next to the cake. Amina's eyes went wide, her mouth opening in shock. Snip! The second braid fell to the floor. The music seemed to fade into silence. Guests froze mid-bite. A fork clattered to the ground. Someone gasped loudly. Amina's father sat motionless, his hand on his knee, his eyes darting between Grace and his daughter. He said nothing. Grace straightened, holding the scissors like a trophy. Her voice rang out, sharp and cold. "Now you look like the poor child you really are." Her words sliced deeper than the scissors ever could. Amina's face burned with humiliation. Her throat tightened, and hot tears blurred her vision. She couldn't bear to look at anyone. She could feel the weight of all those eyes, some shocked, some pitying, some avoiding her altogether. Without a word, she pushed back her chair and ran. The room felt too small, the air too heavy. She darted down the hallway, her bare feet slapping against the floor, tears streaming freely now. She reached her room, slammed the door shut, and collapsed on the bed. She buried her face in her pillow, her body shaking. The braids she had loved so much were gone. It wasn't just hair. It was the part of her that made her feel beautiful, the part people admired. And Grace had taken it from her in front of everyone, turning her happiest day into her worst. Back in the living room, the party sat in stunned silence. The cake still had its candles burning, but no one dared to touch it. The smell of food hung in the air, but the taste of joy had vanished. Amina stayed in her room for the rest of the party, curled up on her bed with her face buried in her pillow. She could hear the muffled voices of guests leaving, some whispering, some pretending nothing had happened. No one came to check on her. She felt small, invisible, and so alone. When the last chair had been stacked and the music turned off, her father finally came into the room. For a moment, she thought he was going to hug her, to tell her it was wrong, to promise he would never let anyone hurt her like that again. But his face was tight, and his voice was low and stern. "You must not disrespect Grace," he said. "She is your stepmother, and you must learn to live with her." Amina stared at him in disbelief. "But she—" He cut her off. "Enough. I don't want to hear it. What happened today? Let it go." She felt the words like stones in her chest. Let it go. How could she let go of the shame, the sting of the scissors, the laughter and gasps that had filled the room? Her father's silence hurt more than Grace's cruelty. At least with Grace, she expected it. From him, she had expected love, protection. Over the next few days, the story spread through the town like smoke in the wind. Some neighbors stopped her in the market, their eyes full of pity. "Sorry about what happened," they would murmur, shaking their heads. Others weren't so kind. She overheard a group of women saying she must have done something to deserve it. "You know children these days," one of them said. "They can be disrespectful." Amina began to walk with her head down, avoiding people's eyes. At school, some classmates whispered when she passed by, while others touched her short hair and giggled. She didn't fight back. She didn't have the strength. Each night she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why her father hadn't stood up for her, why he had chosen silence instead of defending his own child. At home, Grace acted as though nothing had happened. She gave Amina more chores, sometimes smiling faintly as if to remind her who was in control. Her father buried himself in work and barely looked at her. The house that had once felt like a place of safety now felt like a cage. Amina stopped talking much. She did what she was told, kept her eyes down, and stayed out of the way. Inside, though, a quiet storm was building. She didn't know it yet, but the pain and betrayal she carried would one day become the fuel for something bigger than Grace, bigger than her father's silence, and bigger than the whispers of the town. A week after the birthday incident, Amina was sweeping the front yard when a tall, stylish woman stepped through the gate. She wore a flowing kitenge dress in bright yellow and blue, her hair neatly braided and wrapped in a matching scarf. Her smile lit up her whole face. "Amina," she called warmly, "you've grown so much." It took Amina a moment to recognize her, Aunt Zawadi, her late mother's younger sister. She lived in Nairobi and only visited once in a long while. The last time Amina had seen her, she was still a little girl clinging to her mother's side. Zawadi hugged her tightly, holding her for a moment longer than usual, as if she could feel the weight Amina carried. She stepped back, her eyes scanning Amina's short hair. Her smile softened. "I've heard what happened," she said gently. Amina's chest tightened. She didn't want to cry in front of her aunt, but the kindness in Zawadi's voice made it harder to hold back. She lowered her gaze. "It's fine," she murmured, though it was anything but fine. Zawadi tilted her head and touched Amina's chin, making her look up. "Listen to me, my girl," she said. "Your crown is not on your head, it's in your heart. Hair grows back, but who you are, that's something no one can cut off." Those words settled into Amina's heart like warm sunlight breaking through clouds. No one had spoken to her like that since her mother passed. Over the next few days, Zawadi spent time with her, asking about school, listening to her dreams. When Amina shyly admitted she wanted to be a hairdresser someday, Zawadi's eyes lit up. "Then you must learn from the best," she said with a playful grin. "And lucky for you, your aunt owns one of the busiest beauty salons in Nairobi. We do everything: braids, cuts, makeup, even weddings." She leaned closer. "If you want, I can teach you. You have the hands for it, I can tell." For the first time in weeks, Amina felt a spark of hope. The thought of learning from Zawadi, of touching beautiful hair, and creating styles that made people smile, felt like a dream she had almost forgotten. Grace wasn't happy about how much time the two spent together, but Zawadi didn't seem to care. She took Amina to the market, showing her how to choose the right hair oils and beads, explaining how each style had its own meaning and beauty. She even let Amina practice braiding on a mannequin head she had brought from Nairobi. Each time Amina's fingers moved through the strands, she felt a little stronger, a little more herself. She didn't know exactly what the future would look like, but she knew one thing: she was no longer alone. And with Zawadi by her side, her dream didn't seem so far away anymore. When Zawadi returned to Nairobi, she didn't leave Amina behind. Instead, she spoke to Amina's father and offered to take her for the school holiday. Grace didn't protest. Maybe she thought it meant one less mouth to feed. For Amina, it felt like freedom. The moment she stepped into Zawadi's salon in Nairobi, her eyes widened. The place was alive with color and energy. Shelves lined with jars of hair cream, bottles of oil, and beads in every shade. The air smelled faintly of coconut and shea butter, mixed with the sound of women chatting, laughing, and the steady snip of scissors. Mirrors reflected bright smiles and beautiful hairstyles, and for the first time in a long while, Amina felt like she belonged somewhere. Zawadi wasted no time. "If you're going to learn, you start from the ground up," she told her. So Amina began by sweeping hair from the floor, washing combs, and making tea for customers. But she didn't just work, she watched. She studied the way Zawadi parted hair perfectly, how she used her fingers to braid with speed and precision, how she listened to customers' stories as if they were old friends. Soon, Zawadi began teaching her more. She showed her how to section hair neatly, how to choose styles that matched a client's face, and how to apply makeup that brought out someone's natural beauty. Amina's hands, already gentle from years of braiding Lydia's hair, moved with a natural rhythm. Customers began to notice. "Who braided me today?" one woman asked, touching her hair in the mirror. "That's my niece," Zawadi said proudly. The woman smiled. "She has magic in her fingers." It wasn't just her skill, it was the way she made people feel. Amina had a quiet warmth that drew people in. She listened to their stories, remembered their children's names, and always offered a genuine smile. Customers began asking for her by name. With each holiday she spent in Nairobi, her skills grew. Zawadi taught her about running a salon, how to manage money, keep supplies stocked, and treat every customer like a VIP. She explained the importance of saving, and Amina took that lesson to heart. Every time she earned a small tip from a satisfied client, she tucked it away in a tin box she hid at the back of her suitcase. She didn't tell anyone, not even Zawadi. She wasn't sure what the money would be for yet, but she knew she wanted to build something of her own one day. Back in Mbale, Grace barely noticed the changes in her. But inside, Amina was different. She carried herself with quiet confidence now, her hands always itching to create. The girl who once cried herself to sleep now had a dream that was no longer just a wish. It was a plan taking shape, braid by braid, style by style. 8 years passed, and Amina was no longer the shy, quiet girl who once ran from her own birthday table in tears. She was 20 now, confident, graceful, and with a smile that carried both strength and warmth. The dream she had once whispered to herself in the dark had grown into something far bigger than she had ever imagined. She stepped out of a shiny black car onto the dusty road of Mbale, the place she had once felt so small in. But this time, she wasn't coming back empty-handed. Across East Africa, people knew the name Crown and Glory, a chain of beauty salons she had built from the ground up. The logo, a golden crown with a braid woven through it, hung proudly above every branch. In Nairobi, Kampala, Dar es Salaam, and beyond, her salons buzzed with life. Women laughing, girls getting their first braids, brides preparing for their big day. Magazines had written about her, calling her the Queen of Style and the young woman who turns hair into art. But Amina didn't just build a business for herself. She used her success to lift others. Every year, she sponsored young girls, especially orphans and those from poor families, to learn hairdressing. She gave them not just skills, but hope, just like Zawadi had once given her. Now she was back in Mbale to open her newest branch. Word had spread quickly, and people gathered along the street to see her. Children waved, women smiled, and even those who once whispered cruel things about her stood in awe. She wore a long, flowing dress the color of deep maroon, her hair styled in intricate braids that framed her face like a crown. As she walked toward the new salon, she could see the sign, Crown and Glory, Mbale Branch. Inside, the place gleamed with mirrors, bright lights, and rows of neatly arranged products. Young trainees in matching aprons waited eagerly to start their first day. Amina gave a small speech before cutting the ribbon. She spoke about her journey, not with bitterness, but with gratitude for the lessons, even the painful ones. She thanked her late mother for inspiring her love of beauty, Aunt Zawadi for opening the door, and every woman who had ever sat in her chair and trusted her hand. When the ribbon finally fell, the crowd erupted in cheers. Amina looked around at the faces, and for a moment, she remembered the girl she used to be, the one with tears in her eyes and shorn braids on the floor. She smiled to herself. That girl had not been destroyed. She had been planted, and now she had bloomed. And deep inside, she knew she was only getting started. The wedding was in full celebration, music, dancing, and the smell of roasted meat drifting through the air. The bride's hair was an intricate masterpiece, styled by none other than Amina herself. She had been invited not just as a guest, but as the woman who had made the bride feel like a queen on her special day. The reception hall glittered with fairy lights, and guests moved between tables, greeting old friends. Amina was chatting with a group of women when she felt it, a shift in the air, a presence she hadn't felt in years. She turned slightly and saw her. Grace. She looked smaller than Amina remembered. Her once perfect headscarves were faded, her skin tired, her eyes carrying a weight that no makeup could hide. She stood hesitating a few feet away, her hands twisting together. For a moment, Amina simply looked at her, taking in the sight of the woman who had once humiliated her in front of an entire room. Grace stepped forward slowly, her voice low and unsure. Amina. I. But Amina raised her hand slightly, stopping her. Her face was calm, her posture unshaken. She didn't need to shout, and she didn't need to cry. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear enough for those nearby to hear. You cut my hair to break me, she said, her eyes locked on Grace's, but you only helped me grow. A hush fell over the small circle of people around them. Someone at a nearby table turned to look. A few guests began whispering, piecing together who Grace was and what Amina was talking about. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air. Grace's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and her shoulders sank. The same pride she once carried was gone. All that was left was a shadow of the woman who had once held scissors like a weapon. Amina didn't move closer, didn't offer false comfort. She simply turned back to the group she'd been speaking with, a polite but final signal that the conversation was over. Grace stood there for a heartbeat longer, her face pale under the bright light. Then she turned and walked away, her steps slow, the sound of whispered voices following her like a trail. Amina didn't watch her go. She had no need to. In her heart, she felt no triumph, no revenge, only a deep sense of closure. The girl who had once run from the table in tears was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, a woman who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. As the music swelled again and laughter returned to the air, Amina smiled and lifted her glass to toast the bride. The night went on, and Grace faded into the background, just another guest in a room where Amina now shone the brightest. The afternoon sun streamed through the open windows of the training room, casting a golden glow on the group of girls seated in a circle. Their laughter filled the air as they practiced braiding each other's hair, the floor scattered with colorful beads and ribbons. In the center, Amina moved from one girl to another, gently guiding their hands, showing them how to part the hair neatly, how to twist the strands just right. These girls were orphans, many of them carrying their own scars and quiet heartbreak. Amina saw herself in them, the uncertainty in their eyes, the longing to be seen and valued. She didn't just teach them hairdressing. She taught them how to believe in themselves, how to stand tall no matter what life had taken from them. As the camera lingered on her face, Amina's voice played over the scene. Pain is not the end of your story. It can be the beginning of something greater, if you let it shape you instead of break you. People will try to take your joy, your confidence, even your dignity. But the truth is, no one can take away your crown unless you hand it to them. The girls beamed proudly at their finished styles. Neat braids, shining beads, bright smile. They didn't just see hair in the mirror. They saw themselves as capable, worthy, and beautiful. Amina looked at them and felt that same warmth she had once felt from Aunt Zawadi's words. Her journey had started in pain, but it had led here, to hope, to purpose, to lifting others up. The final shot froze on Amina's smile as the girls laughed around her, their crowns shining in the afternoon light.